There's a task you've moved to tomorrow 4 times. It isn't hard. If you sat down and did it, it would take about 20 minutes. You know this. You knew it each of the 4 times you moved it, and you still didn't do it. The word you've probably used for that is lazy. I want to show you why that word has no scientific meaning at all, and what researchers actually find when they go looking for the thing you're calling laziness. But first, I have to take 3 things away from you. All 3 are things you've been told. None of them survived. The first is that willpower is a fuel tank. The idea is called ego depletion. It comes from a 1998 paper by Roy Baumeister and his colleagues, and it is probably the most influential thing psychology has said about self-control in the last 30 years. Resist a temptation, and you use some up. Use enough, and there's nothing left for the next thing. In 2016, 23 laboratories ran the same experiment on more than 2,000 people. The effect came back at essentially 0. The response from the theory's defenders was that the replication had used the wrong task, so in 2021 they ran it again. 36 sites, 3,500 people. And this time, the experiment was designed together with the theory's own architects, using the tasks they said were the right ones. It came back at 0 again. The results were more than 4 times more likely under the hypothesis that there is no effect than under the hypothesis that there is one. A 2019 review of the whole debate put it carefully, and I think correctly. The burden of proof, they wrote, has shifted from the skeptics to the proponents. Your willpower is not a tank. There is nothing in there to run out. The second thing follows from the first. If willpower is fuel, then sugar should refill it. There was a run of studies in the late 2000s showing exactly that. Blood glucose drops after self-control, and a sugary drink restores performance. In 2016, Miguel Vadillo and colleagues took 19 of those articles apart statistically. The method they used examines the distribution of results across a whole literature to see whether it contains real evidence or just selective reporting. The verdict was that it contained no evidential value at all. The pattern in the numbers was the signature of a file drawer, not a finding. There's also a physiological problem that was pointed out early and then mostly ignored. Your brain uses roughly a fixed share of your body's glucose, around 1/5 of it, whether you are solving a hard problem or staring at a wall. It burns about the same amount doing difficult work as doing nothing. A mint cannot refill something that never emptied. The third thing is the most recent, and it's the one you've probably heard most this year. Dopamine detox. Dopamine debt. The idea that modern life has left you in some kind of deficit and that you need to fast from pleasure in order to reset your baseline. 2 things about that. The first is that the man who coined the term does not believe the version you've heard. Cameron Sepa, who wrote the original piece in 2019, spends much of it explaining what he did not mean. It is not about reducing dopamine, he says. The focus is on reducing impulsive behavior, and it is not about avoiding stimulation or pleasure. What he proposed was stimulus control, a standard technique from cognitive behavioral therapy applied to a short list of specific behaviors, and only where they were causing that particular person a problem. The version people now practice, sitting in silence, avoiding conversation, avoiding eye contact, is close to the opposite of what he wrote. The second is that there is very little underneath the dopamine part. The best directly relevant human study I could find looked at brain scans alongside phone use, and did find that people who spent more of their screen time on social apps had lower dopamine synthesis capacity in one region of the brain. That study had 22 participants. It was cross-sectional, so it cannot tell you which direction the arrow points. And it measured synthesis capacity, which is not the same thing as receptor downregulation, which is what the popular claim actually asserts. The authors say plainly in the paper that replication is necessary given the small sample. Then there's scale. The dopamine increases associated with technology. U's are usually estimated at 50 to 100% above baseline. For amphetamine, the figure is around 1,300%. These are not the same category of thing, and treating them as though they are is how you end up believing you need to detox from your own ordinary life. So, willpower is not a tank. Sugar does not refill it, and you are not in dopamine debt. Here is what actually holds up. Start with a rat. Since the early 1990s, John Salamoni and Merce Correa have run a version of the same experiment many times over. A rat is placed in a maze with two arms. One arm has a small amount of ordinary food, freely available. The other arm has a much better food, 4 times as much of it, sitting behind a barrier the rat has to climb. Normal rats climb. The good food is worth the work. Now reduce dopamine in a specific region called the nucleus accumbens. The rat stops climbing. It goes to the easy arm and eats the boring food. Here is the part that makes this important, and it's the detail that gets left out almost every time the study is described. That rat is not tired. Its movement is unimpaired. It is not full, because at these doses, total food intake didn't change. And it has not stopped liking the good food, because its preference is unchanged. And if you take the easy option away entirely, so the barrier arm is the only food in the maze, it climbs the barrier. It could do it the whole time. So what dopamine changed was not desire, and not pleasure, and not physical capacity. What changed was how much effort the reward seemed to be worth. That is what dopamine does here. It sets the exchange rate between effort and reward, which is a completely different claim from the one you usually hear about it. Now, the part that answers the question. If this were about effort, then difficulty would predict procrastination. Harder tasks would get put off more often. In 2021, a group of researchers tested exactly that, and they did it well. Instead of asking people to remember their own habits, which people are terrible at, they followed 75 people through 501 real tasks as those tasks were happening. Here is what they found. When a task felt more unpleasant than the person had expected when they planned it, the chance of it being delayed roughly doubled. And how much effort people judged the task to require predicted nothing at all. Not a weak effect. Nothing. There's one more result in that study, and I think it's the most important sentence in this video. People's scores on a standard trait procrastination questionnaire, the kind that tells you what sort of person you are, failed to predict whether any specific task actually got delayed. So the thing you have been calling laziness is not a property of you. It is a property of the relationship between you and one particular task, and specifically of a feeling attached to it. That framing has a name. Fuchsia Sirois and Timothy Pikila proposed that procrastination is not a failure of time management, but an act of mood repair. You are not avoiding the work. You are avoiding how the work makes you feel. And you are doing it by taking a small amount of relief now and charging it to a version of yourself who does not exist yet. I'll be honest about the status of that idea. The original paper is a review, not an experiment. A meta-analysis of 88 studies and more than 60,000 people found a real and consistent link between procrastination and negative emotion, but it accounts for only about 12% of the variation. And the authors say clearly that causality cannot be established from it. Take it as the best available framework, not a proven mechanism. Which brings us back to the word. Psychology has a validated measurement scale for apathy. It has one for procrastination. It has one for conscientiousness, which is stable, and which does predict a great deal about how a person's life goes. It has never built one for laziness, not because nobody thought of it. Because every time researchers go looking for that trait, what they find underneath is a cost-benefit calculation with a feeling sitting on one side of it. So what do you actually do? The clinical evidence points somewhere specific. The approach is called behavioral activation, and the core of it is scheduling action independently of whether you feel like doing it. A large trial called Cobra randomized 440 people and found it performed as well as full cognitive behavioral therapy. The detail I find remarkable is who delivered it. Junior mental health workers with no formal psychotherapy training, after 5 days of instruction, matched specialist psychotherapists. Be precise about the limits, though. Behavioral activation is a treatment for clinical depression. It is not proof of a general law that action always precedes motivation. What it establishes is narrower and still useful. Waiting until you feel ready is not a requirement for behavior to change. So, 3 things. And I'll tell you which one is me reasoning rather than reporting. 1. Stop asking how hard it is. The research says difficulty is not the variable. Ask instead what specifically is unpleasant about it. Is it boring? Is it ambiguous, so that you don't know what finished actually looks like? Is it something that might be judged by someone? Those are 3 different problems. They need 3 different answers, and you cannot choose the answer until you have named the feeling. 2. Shrink the feeling, not the task. The usual advice is to break work into smaller pieces, but if the thing you're avoiding is ambiguity, then 5 small ambiguous pieces is 5 times the problem. If the aversive part is not knowing what done looks like, the first action isn't a smaller piece of the work. It's writing 1 sentence that describes what finished would look like. That is me reasoning from the finding, rather than pointing at a trial that tested it, and I want you to know the difference as I say it. 3. Start before the feeling changes. This is the behavioral activation principle, and it is the best supported thing here. You are allowed to begin something while still not wanting to. The wanting is not a prerequisite. It very often shows up afterwards, and when it doesn't, the work still got done. Here's what I want you to take away. You have been treating this as a problem with your character and applying the solutions you would apply to a character problem. Discipline, shame, promises made at 11 at night about who you're going to be tomorrow. But the best evidence available says your character is not what predicts whether that specific task gets done. What predicts it is a feeling attached to that specific task. One you probably haven't looked at directly, because looking at it is itself slightly unpleasant. Your character is not going to change tonight. The feeling can be looked at in about 90 seconds. That is the whole difference.